Now that we've learned about three different organizational hierarchies that can help us pinpoint what exactly we're learning about and knowing about in biology, we can look at biology itself. And a good place to start is, what are the things that life depends on? Well, you might think, well, life depends on water and air and all that stuff. I'm talking about what it is that really defines life, the essentials of life. I've come up with four things that I think are really essential to having life. And other people probably have similar four categories. The first one I think is essential is information. Many people think about DNA and RNA polymers as having the information. That's definitely a place where information comes into play. And there are other places, too, in the three-dimensional organization of the cell. The second thing I like to think about is machinery, things that do the jobs inside the cell. And proteins are a big factor in that. That's why you have to eat protein, so you can replenish your machinery. But RNA can also do some of the jobs of machines, and there are other things inside the cell that are acting like machines. The third one I like to talk about are enclosures, keeping the boundaries safe and sound inside of the cell. And most of that is done with lipid bilayers. We don't want too much lipid in our diet, but if you didn't have any, you wouldn't be able to form boundaries inside of your cells. And then the final one, which is something probably everybody knows about, which is energy. Life requires energy. And inside the cell, ATP, adenosine triphosphate, is the main currency of information. And that is the usable energy that happens inside of the cell. You can't just have energy. It has to be usable in the form that a cell could use. Now, I like to look for these four different essentials at each of the levels inside of the cell, the information that goes on inside the cell, but there's information at the level of organs and tissues, machinery, the pumping of a heart. That's like the machinery at that level. Enclosures, the things that form an enclosure between organs or between tissue types. The energy of the muscles, you can think about it at the level way higher than the level of ATP. So looking for these four essentials at each of the levels is also instructive. Life can do without some things. You can imagine life without having branching oligosaccharides, possibly, but you can't imagine it without the four things that I just mentioned. It's good to note that the energy in life really comes from the sun. And that's true for 99.9% of the organisms on Earth. But sometimes, and this is kind of interesting, it can come from the chemical bonds that were created in the thermal energy of the Earth. So that's the possibility of having life without the sun. So that would be really amazing. Now, an activity to help you understand what essential means in terms of what I'm talking about is to think about what it is that makes something an electronic device rather than just a mechanical device or some other chemical device. What is it that makes something an electronic device? So try to think of something that if you held up something and said, is that an electronic device? You'd say yes. Is this an electronic device? You'd say no. What is it that allows you to discriminate between those things? What can you get it? Is it that it has to have wires? Does it have to have battery in it or plug into the wall? What is it that says to you, this is an electronic device? Can you boil this list of things just down to four essential items? Take some time to do that and think about what is it. And then once you have it boiled down, can you think about what gets left out? What things could you have added to the list, but if you really had to just go down to four things, you cut that out. And you might get down to the point where some things now are a bit ambiguous because you cut out everything but those last four. Using the same thinking, what do you think is left out of the four essentials of life? Don't think about anything small like water. We're going to talk about water later, but big concepts, something along the lines of energy, information, boundaries, that kind of thing. Have I left something out? It's entirely possible. You think about what are the essentials of life? What gives you a perfect clue that if you discovered this on another planet, it would be life. Okay? If you have all the four essentials and nothing else, could you still get life? Maybe, at least in a thought experiment, you could do it without some of the other things that are often found in life. Now, another thing that might help you understand information as one of the four essentials and the machinery that goes into life as the other four essential is the terminology people use when they're talking about information flow. So, what machinery is required for copying text in human language? Like photocopiers or printing presses. What machinery would you need to take text that is written in a human language and make new text that's copies of that old text? And what are some vocabulary that you might use to describe that process? Editing, copy editing, line editing, transcribing, translating that text into a new language, archiving. Those are the kinds of languages you might hear librarians throwing around. Well, in biology, some of the same terms get used for talking about the information copying and the information flow. For example, replication. You make a replica. You're making an exact replica of the DNA information. You're going from DNA to another strand of DNA. Transcription, just like when you transcribe somebody's notes, transcription in biology talks about going from DNA information into RNA information. And that turns out to be a one-to-one match because there are 4 letters in DNA and there are 4 letters in RNA, so it's a one-to-one match. Translation in biology talks about converting RNA or DNA information into protein. And because RNA and protein have different number of letters, it's not a one-to-one conversion. It's actually a 3-to-1 conversion. There's 3 pieces of information in the RNA strand that get turned into one piece or one letter of information in a growing protein strand. So replication, transcription, and translation, those sound like librarian words, but they're actually now adopted into describing what happens in biology. Some of the terms that you might hear thrown around in biology are coined from those 3 words. For example, reverse transcription, as you can imagine, goes the reverse direction from what I just said. Transcription goes from DNA to RNA, so reverse transcription goes from RNA back to DNA. And that's something that the HIV enzymes can do. HIV, the human immunovirus, the virus that causes AIDS, it goes backwards. Transcriptome is kind of like a genome, but it only applies to the things that were transcribed, or those RNA that were transcribed from DNA. So these are words you might hear thrown around in biology, and they come from the language of librarians. Now, all of this information about the 4 essentials is deep, is rich, requires you to think about it, spend a little bit of time trying to get into what is the essential of life, just so you can think about why you're studying biology, which is the study of life, and what makes life life. So take a little time to do that. And if you're learning about the BioBook and doing some extra reading, the assignment for today is to look at the root ISF, information, storage, and flow, and a bunch of the different subcomponents under that. For example, the leaf, what are the common characteristics of living things? The branch, what is the structure of DNA? Another branch, how do cells read and execute the instructions in DNA? And also, finally, the branch, how and when do cells duplicate their DNA? There's a lot of information here, so it's probably best if you just skim it to try to find examples of the 4 essentials that I mentioned. See if you can find places that show how energy, enclosures, and machinery are all essential to making this happen.